Thank you for joining us for our second Interfaith panel. So excited to have even more attendees this time than last. That is great. Let's keep this movement growing. My name is Emma Goldblatt, and I'm the program manager for the nonprofit organization Peace Advocacy Network. PAN's mission is to promote a peaceful existence through veganism, social justice, and respect for the Earth's inhabitants and resources. PAN strives for the absence of violence in the lives of people and animals by eliminating oppression and inequity. To this end, PAN is committed to fostering, cultivating, and preserving a culture of diversity and inclusion among everyone we work with. And we are so grateful for our co-sponsors. First, I wanted to introduce Barbara of the AIA to say a few words about her organization.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm delighted to see so many of you, and I'm always delighted to be co-hosting an event with the Peace Advocacy Network and the wonderful Emma. Just a little bit about the Animal Interfaith Alliance. We're an alliance of the world's most influential faith-based animal advocacy organisations, which speaks out on the moral treatment of animals by drawing on the combined wisdom of all faiths and worldviews. But we also promote social harmony by bringing faith groups together on an issue they all share a concern for, animals. And our activities include animal advocacy and education. We're a United Nations Environment Programme accredited organisation and a member of the UNEP's Faith for Earth Coalition. We're also a member of the World Federation for Animals and Eurogroup for Animals. And we basically work with everybody to promote animal welfare. Our vision is a peaceful world where people of all faiths and none work together to treat animals with respect and compassion. Why do we feel this is so important? Well, because over 80% of the world's population claim to belong to a faith. So their views will make a difference and can lead to global transformation. And all faiths teach compassion to animals. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. We're so glad to have you here. Next, I'd like to introduce Lisa of the IVC and IDA to say a few words.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm Lisa Levinson, Campaigns Director for In Defense of Animals and a co-founder of the Interfaith Vegan Coalition. And we are actually a partner organization to the Animal Interfaith Alliance, which Barbara just talked about. Our group has about 55 members and we're growing. And what we do is faith-based animal advocacy. We have some vegan animal advocacy kits that are religion specific that people can access for help if they want to promote compassion for animals within their tradition and at their place of worship. And we also have all kinds of programs that we participate in. We join in with the Parliament of the World's Religions. We participate in Golden Rule Day. And we are so thrilled to also co-sponsor this panel today.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We're so grateful to have you. Now I wanted to introduce our three panelists. So we have three very passionate vegan advocates with us today, and their accomplishments are great. And while I wish I could list all of them for you here today, I also want to leave plenty of time for them to speak and answer questions. So I'll make sure to put their websites linked. I will put it here in the Zoom and then also wherever this video is posted so you can learn more about them. But with that, we have Matthew Haltman. He is a professor of philosophy at Calvin University, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and fellow at the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics. He is the author of Compassionate Eating as Care of Creation and co-editor of Philosophy Comes to Dinner, Arguments about the Ethics of Eating. His new book, Hungry Beautiful Animals, The Joyful Case for Going Vegan, releases in November 2024. We also have Hina Modi. As ambassador of veganism, nutrition practitioner, and an author of 2 books, Hina Modi helps people facilitate the shift to a plant-based diet, vegan lifestyle, or both. Having been vegan for over 16 years and a vegetarian for decades before that, Hina has lived the experiences and messages she shared. Her website, planshift.com, covers vegan options everywhere, nutritional well-being, recipes, tips, holiday experiences as a vegan, and interviews with exciting new vegan businesses. Lastly, we have Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz. He has twice been named one of America's top rabbis by Newsweek and has been named by The Forward as one of the 50 most influential Jews and one of the most inspiring rabbis in America. He's the author of 27 books on Jewish ethics, and his writing has appeared in diverse outlets among many secular and religious publications. He serves as the founder and president of Shemayim Jewish Animal Advocacy. So with that, welcome to our three panelists. We are not going to waste another second. We're just going to hop right into the first question. The first question being, how does your faith inform your view of veganism? And we will go in the same order I introduced and start with Matthew.
Thank you so much, Emma, Barbara, Lisa, and esteemed panelists, Hina and Rav Shmuley. It's just a thrill to be here at a time when faith traditions sometimes have a difficult time getting along. It's just a beautiful thing to be here in the midst of a glorious diversity of the great creatures that on this planet we share. So I'm excited to be here, and thanks for the opportunity. In the spiritual tradition that I grew up in, the aspiration to follow Jesus is less a worldview or a set of doctrines than an evolving way of life that we aspire to practice daily through acts of love. So I grew up in the Mennonite tradition, and I'll tell you what, we hear every Sunday, the hymn, "They'll know we are Christians by our love." That was drummed into me, along with simple living, more than probably any other thing I experienced as a young aspiring follower of Jesus. And so as a result, I'm inclined to think of my vegan practice in that same way. It's not a worldview. It's not a set of inflexible rules. It's not an identity that I achieve through perfectionism or risk losing through inevitable mistakes. I think we can all agree that there are plenty of those. Rather, it's an aspiration to live each day toward each feeling creature in love. So whether it's myself or the members of my inner family or the members of my immediate and extended family, the creatures in my yard, the creatures across the world, I hope to continue growing in my understanding of how excessive, beautiful, grace-drenched acts of love can lead to flourishing. So that's what it's meant for me. And what I mean by flourishing is just a life productive of what Christ followers call the fruit of the Spirit. Right? So evidence of divine love active in the world, fruits like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. When I look at our food system and I think about whether those values are reflected in it, I don't see that they are. And so for me, going vegan is a practice aimed at trying to get a beautiful harvest of the fruits of the Spirit in my day-to-day practice.
Very nice. Thank you for sharing. Hina, how about you?
Hi everyone. Thanks for being thank you for being here, and it's just an amazing opportunity to be part of this. My journey is quite interesting. So even though I grew up practicing some rituals in Jainism, I didn't really know much more beyond that. And something changed when I was 11. I used to eat meat, but maybe at like the babysitters or a school dinners or that kind of thing. And then suddenly when I was 11, I decided that I didn't agree with killing animals for food. I have no idea where it came from. But I carried on eating eggs and dairy and all the rest of it because I didn't know any better. And as far as I was concerned, ahimsa, non-violence, which is one of the things we talk about in Jainism, stopped when you were vegetarian. And then there was an event which was to do with celebrating Lord Mahavira's birth. And someone from PETA was there, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. And she basically shared a video about dairy production. And I just cried throughout the whole thing. After that, I couldn't partake in it anymore. And through that, I found out about honey and silk and wool and that kind of thing. So the beginning was from a Jain event that made all this happen. And then it snowballed from there. So I guess my faith, the bits that have informed it after that first event are ahimsa, non-violence to all living beings. There's a thing called Abhedan, which I only found out about recently. It was just beautiful. It's about the gift of fearlessness. So any living being can sense fear if we want something from them, whether it's their flesh or their milk or their skin or their labor or whatever. And how would it be if we could give them the ability to not fear it? And like that, so that's a big one. So that's one of the things. Another thing is, another one of the vows is asteya, which is about not stealing or even borrowing without permission. So if that's the case, what would animals willfully give us? I can't justify not being vegan in that way. And one of the other things is Maitri. So that's a reflection. There's 16 reflections in Jainism, and Maitri is all about seeing all living beings as friends. And if we had this universal friendship towards all living beings, human and not, then we wouldn't exploit them, entrap them, all that stuff that we do when we're not vegan. So yeah, it just it helps me stay vegan. It helped me become vegan through this event, and then I stayed vegan because of all this other stuff.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. Rabbi Shmuley?
Yes, it is wonderful to be with you, Emma, and to be with these great speakers and partners and all of you. And I'm excited for this conversation together on how we can embrace the particularity of our own religions, but also transcend them into a universal consciousness that unites all of humanity and all of life, that doesn't do away with the particularity of our faiths, but also enables us to build bridges of commonality. And I think that this is the pathway towards a less violent, a more compassionate world. And I used to believe that whatever is natural is good. Natural equals good. I think that's part of the ethos of our day, even to the extent of like animals killing each other for food is also okay because that's their nature. But I really do try to live with the messianic dream that the lion will lie down with the lamb, and that there will be a day where even things that are natural will be surpassed. And the lion lying down with the lamb, I came to see that we are the lion. We are the ones that have to lie down, right? We are the ones that are preying upon the innocent. We are the ones who are the most destructive of all species. And so we don't need to wait for a messianic era where our nature fundamentally changes and the lion won't seek out the lamb. It's us. It's the spiritual revolution that we're ultimately working towards. So veganism and Judaism, well, the term veganism, of course, is less than a century old. So veganism and Judaism, which is 4,000 years old, don't jive. But the broader ethos of what this is about in terms of how we relate to food and how food is not just there to be fulfill desire, but food is there to nourish spiritually and ethically who we are at our core. This is very deep. This is very deep. As a reminder, the birth of moral consciousness emerges in the first act of food consumption, right? In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve have no moral reasoning capability. It is not till they eat from Eitz Hadat Tov Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that the birth of moral consciousness emerges. Which is to say, the story is telling us that that the most intertwined of ethical decisions and human capabilities is eating. That when we eat, that is the most consistent moral choice we make. Now, unfortunately, today, people tend to think of themselves as virtuous based upon how they vote.
There it
Okay,
is.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So when we vote, so rarely it is important, but it is not at the heart of what it means to be a moral being. But every time we eat, we're making a deeply moral choice. And so I believe that for my own faith commitment, that this is at the core of what it means to be a religious Jew.
Thank you for sharing. And sorry about that technical difficulty there. Okay, well, we are going to move on to the next question, which is, what does compassion for animals look like in your religion? And what are humanity's responsibilities to animals, if any, in your faith? And we will start with Matt.
Thank you. So the more that I learn about my own religious tradition, the more I see, sometimes thankfully, sometimes reluctantly, that tradition is always already traditions, right? That there's a wide umbrella of different things that think of themselves as Christianity or following Jesus. And in my frankly honest experience, it's a pretty mixed bag what the Christian tradition has had to offer, both historically and theologically. And of course, for a long time, as a Christian animal advocate, I was living, I'm not going to lie, just in shame, right? Because my experience of my own tradition was what I learned from Peter Singer in the classic book, Animal Liberation Now, where basically the plight of animals in the West and increasingly everywhere is sort of laid at the foot of the Judeo-Christian philosophical tradition. And that really made me feel ashamed. But I'm very grateful that there is a fascinating and beautiful profusion of literature now. However dark the past has been, I think the future is looking bright and beautiful. And of course, I hope you'll indulge me. I'm a teacher, and so I brought some books that I'm very excited to share. Theology, right? If you need a complete rethink of how Christians should be envisioning, right, Shalom and the Peaceable Kingdom, I think David Clough's On Animals, the 2-volume story. If you want to learn about the history of Christian animal rights, there's Andrew Lindsay's famous book from 1976, Christianity and the Rights of Animals. I also think the future of Christian animal advocacy needs to drink much more deeply from our Jewish brothers and sisters. Here's a book by a rabbi I know, from which I've learned a great deal. It's Rabbi Shmuley's The Jewish Vegan. And I also want to look at practical books, right, that talk about what animal love looks like in your life. These books by Carol Adams are actually prayers and liturgies for changing the way you think about your companion animals' deaths, for changing the way you think about blessings in your place of worship. And I also envision a Christian animal advocacy that is not a one-issue advocacy. So I don't know if you've heard of the Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter's The Spirit of Soul Food, Race, Faith, and Food Justice. This is an absolutely beautiful and holistic account of how going vegan and food justice generally serves the whole of creation and all of its creatures. And then finally, I think that the 5.8 billion people in the world who are religious thinking people would benefit a lot from reading Lisa Kemmerer's Animals and World Religions. And also she has a volume called Call to Compassion, Religious Perspectives on Animal Advocacy. These are books that can really help us see what we all have in common and come together across the differences in our religious heritages and really come together around a beautiful common theme.
Thank you for sharing. We had someone ask in the chat to list the books somewhere. So if you have time to put them in the chat, or you can send them to me after the panel and I'll get that list out. Thank you.
The Hebrew word for compassion is rachamim, and that comes from the same word as a mother's womb, which is rechem. That be compassionate is being in this holding space of love, being immersed in that consciousness and that care and that nourishment. And I want to share a Talmudic passage, actually. I'm going to put it in the chat here. This comes from the Talmud. It says, calf was being taken away to slaughter when it ran away and hid his head under Rabbi Judah the prince's robes and cried and said, "Go, for this you were created." They said, "Since he has no pity, let us bring suffering upon him." One day, Rabbi's maidservant was sweeping the house, saw some young weasels lying there, and made to sweep them away. Said to her, "Let them be. It's written, and his mercy is over all his works," from Psalms. They said, "Since he is compassionate, let us be compassionate to him." So Rabbi Judah Rabbi Judah the Prince is not just any average person in the Talmud. 2,000 years ago, he's the redactor of the whole Mishnah, the whole first part of the Talmud, serious person. And yet the Talmud has no problem critiquing him and saying that because he has such an anthropocentric worldview, and he thinks that the rest of the world is here just to use as we please, even abusively, right, that he will suffer from that. Not necessarily a divine punishment, which you might call karma, kind of like the suffering he's putting out will kind of come back towards him. And once kind of cultivating that compassion that God has mercy over all works, then that compassion kind of comes back. And so this is already 2,000 years ago in the rabbinic tradition that of how central it is to cultivate such a consciousness. But the last thing I want to say at this moment is that I think veganism is actually the floor, not the ceiling. It's the floor, not the ceiling, because it's easy to feel like, and I know a lot of people like this, that, oh, I went vegan, I'm done. I'm like in the camp of virtue. Now all I have to do is make other people vegan. I think it's the floor. It's where we start, okay? We figured out that level of compassion. Now, how do we infuse that into all else that we do?
So I was thinking we spoke about, or I mentioned Asteya and Ahimsa and Abhedan. So there's something else called Anikantvad, which refers to the fact that there are multiple perspectives. So if we take a few examples, so in terms of consumption, my perspective is, and as an example, not really, I like the taste of this flesh or this milk. The animal's perspective is, I need the flesh to stay alive. The milk is not your mother's milk, it's for my child. By the way, where is my child? Where's it gone? In terms of wearables, my perspective might be that I love the feel of this silk on my skin, or the way these cosmetics feel, or the warmth that the down in the coat gives me. But the animal's perspective would be, you boiled me alive to get as much silk as you could. You bred me and held me captive only to kill me, to extract bits of my bones and tendons and connective tissues for the cosmetics so you could look better. For warmth, you held me down by my neck or my wings so you could tear the targeted feathers from my skin. When my skin tore, you sewed it up and used an unsterilized needle and didn't give me any anesthetic, and you just left me to recover for weeks only to do it again. Now, in those examples, how could I say that I'm being compassionate if I ignore or don't take into consideration those animals' perspectives? And the same for ownership. My perspective, you are mine, and the truth is, no living being is yours. So that also takes me to something else, which is in Jainism, the belief is that my true nature is the soul, and the same for any other living being. So it teaches me that nothing is mine apart from the soul and the qualities of the soul. So if nothing is mine, then how can another living being or any part of it be mine? Therefore, to have compassion towards those living beings, and also to myself, because I don't want to bind more karma by doing all these things that, you know, you could maybe call it a sin. So the compassion goes both ways. It goes towards the other living beings that I don't want to bring harm to, and to myself, because I don't want to bind myself further. I want to become liberated and attain moksha or nirvana. So yeah, just a few thoughts.
Thank you for sharing, and I apologize again for
No, it's okay.
Just to quickly remind everyone, our third question was about, does your religion offer any guidance on how we should be eating? So yeah, we'll start with Matthew.
Just want to start by saying how much I appreciate that last answer. The idea from Jainism that we all are Jiva, right? That we all have this light, and the liberation of thinking of karma as tarnishing the light, right? Rather than, it doesn't make you a terrible person, an irredeemable person. It just covers up, right, the natural beauty of who we're designed to be. And that's something that I've learned just absolutely beautifully from your tradition that has blessed me and also really expanded what is frankly sometimes a very narrow theology of sin in some Christian traditions. So thank you for that, and I'm so glad that that came up. My students love that when we read about that in my philosophical transformation class. In terms of what the Christian tradition has to offer here, I'm going to return to the idea of the fruit of the Spirit. Christianity, at least as I've learned about it, has fewer explicit dietary guidelines than some other religious traditions, because there's a focus on this idea of freedom in Christ, that when we're indwelled by the spirit of divine love, and I don't think we have to get necessarily spooky about this, right? What we're talking about is the animating force of love, right? When we have that in our lives, we act in ways that produce and propagate love and joy and peace and patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And so when I think about, what I want people to take about how human beings should nourish themselves, what I think of is, well, let's nourish ourselves in the ways that give us the biggest bumper crops of the fruit of the spirit, right? What approach to eating will make us kinder, more peaceful, more patient, right? More able to feed hungry members of the human community and the other than human community beyond ourselves. And to me, going vegan has been the thing. Some Christian traditions like Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy actually do incorporate spiritual disciplines like feasting and fasting that are aimed to remind us of the vision of a world toward which we're called to aspire, that world of abundance for all creatures and all species kinship, where everyone God made lives a life of justice and joy together. And again, this we get from Judaism. This, right, is not our own. It comes from the Jewish wisdom that we inherited. And so Eastern Orthodox Christians who keep the fasting calendar are actually functionally eating a vegan diet about half the year. So we do have resources within Christianity for thinking about diet as a kind of eschatological, right, moving toward the beautiful shalomic vision and helping us to do that. For me personally, vegan living is a spiritual discipline. That's really what I think of it as. It's a repetitive daily practice that reminds me of my finitude and propels me toward both my better self and the ways my talents and gifts can bless the world. And so for me, I want to live toward that all species kinship, bring that as close to earth as I can, albeit recognizing that I have a tiny little sphere of influence at the end of the day. And so that's what I've taken from my tradition's approach to nourishing ourselves.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. Hina, what do you have to say about this?
It's interesting. There's a lot of guidance about not harming other living beings, whether it's meat or honey or figs. There's a thing called a bhaksha. So a bhaksha is mentioned in Jain and Hindu texts, and it means that which cannot or should not be eaten. And there's over 20 categories. So there's quite a lot about what should or shouldn't be eaten, and the texts are quite explicit and they go into minute detail, including guidance about not eating after sunset. It's even scientifically proven that after sunset there are things in the air, insects and beings, bacteria, whatever, that we can't see. So that then goes on your food and then you're eating these things. So therefore, after sunset, it's better if we don't eat, for example. They go into detail about saying things like, if you want to eat the fruit that's fallen, or pick a fruit from the tree, but don't chop the branch off. There's things like that. And there's also something called Ambel, which happens twice a year. And during that time, the food is vegan, but there's also other things. I think there's no oil and and you can tell I don't do it. But yeah, there are certain criteria, and one of which is that there's no animal products. And I just think that's absolutely amazing. So yeah, there's certain things like that. And there's also certain dates within the calendar where it's in reference to how much water there would be in our system scientifically because of the moon and this and that. So therefore don't eat this, or therefore don't eat that. And they'll also say, on those days when you're not eating green vegetables, for example, or vegetables, let's say, because you're having dried lentils and things like that, it's one, to help balance your system, but two, you are also not killing those living beings, because the belief is that there's even a soul in anything living, including vegetables, insects, everything. So yeah, there's quite a lot. It's very interesting.
Thank you for sharing. That is really interesting. Rabbi Shmuley.
Yeah, thank you. So picking up on the three main Western philosophical camps in ethics, deontology, utilitarianism, and virtue ethics. In the deontological tradition, which very much aligns with a traditional Jewish approach, the notion is that we have a duty, that our obligations emerge from a sense of responsibility. And that very much resonates with the Jewish legal tradition, halakha. Then from utilitarianism or consequentialism, we look at the consequences of our action. And I believe that quantitatively and qualitatively, the greatest suffering on the planet today is in the animal kingdom. If we're talking about just land,
Thank you.
I am so sorry, my internet is just horrible right now. So back to utilitarianism, that we have 80 to 90 billion land animals killed each year, just, you know, in the most atrocious conditions of factory farming, which is more than 99% of it, not to mention the impact on climate, which is detrimental to all of us, and truly terrifying. But then lastly, I think, and most deeply for me, is the virtue ethics. That sense that even if we don't know the consequence of our action, even if we don't feel we have a law or a duty, the question of who we want to be in our character. And that is what I think kashrut was meant to be about, even though it's been distorted. Kashrut, or keeping kosher, has a few different eras. The first era is the Garden of Eden, which is a vegan diet. Then comes the flood. The flood says, okay, now you're permitted to eat meat on a limited level. Then comes animal sacrifice. And then comes kashrut, these kosher laws, which permits, although begrudgingly, the eating of animal products. But now I think we're in a new era, the era of factory farming, the era where we know what's happening to the climate, we know what's happening in the factory farms, we have alternative foods that we can access, and where I believe the next level of keeping kosher is veganism. It's clear to me that's what it is, and that's what I'm promoting in the community. And I'll share how I'm doing that in our next question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, our final planned question anyway is, what have you seen be most effective in moving people toward veganism within your community? Matt.
Yeah, thank you. For me, it's just reminding people that this is ultimately about justice and joy, right? This is a way of being that will help you to live a life where others get their due and you get to be fulfilled, that you get to experience the fullest joy that's possible, for finite, error-prone creatures like us. And so I like to try to invite people to see how wonderfully resonant their deep desires for love and good health and connection and compassion and beauty are with vegan living, right? I mean, we already want the things that we get from going vegan. They're the things that we want most deeply, most of us. And so just helping people to see that in a lot of cases, they are vegans in waiting. Now, I've met some people who aren't vegans in waiting and very proud of it. But a lot of the people that I meet, once they see how deeply aligned their desires are with the vision of going vegan, I mean, it's not even a hard sell. I don't have to sell it, right? It's like going in for a second bite of tiramisu, right? You don't need a second invitation once you've tasted and seen how beautiful it is. And so I try to, I mean, for many years, I did a lot of the stuff on the suffering and the death and the widespread destruction. And over the past decade, I've really moved away from that. Maybe it's because I'm getting old and I'm not a serious activist anymore. I don't know. Sometimes I worry that I'm losing my nerve and that I'm doing more about joy than I should be. But what I've seen on the ground is that people want to be delighted. They want to be fulfilled. They want to experience joy, and they can with something that's much simpler than most people realize. And I've found that that message really resonates deeply, not just in my community, but wherever I go, I'm talking about those things. And that's essentially what I'm trying to do in the book, which is, as you've seen, conveniently located right over my shoulder here, but trying to tell a joyful story, right, about what this has to offer rather than just showing people the things that are sad.
Thank you so much. Hina.
Yeah, you know, when I first went vegan, I think I was very much how Matt says that he's moved away from, which I've also moved away from. I think I didn't really know much apart from the negative stuff out there, the statistics, the horrible things that happen, and I couldn't get beyond that either. And once I knew it, I didn't understand how, if anyone else knew it, how they couldn't make the shift. So I couldn't let go of it, and it was just so irrational to me, so illogical. But I think I alienated a lot of people, including myself, like, just, and it did no good. Like, if we talk about Garma, it did no good for them, did no good for me. If we talk about just general, how the feeling they walked away from, with when they were with me, or walking away from me, that's just no good either. And I think I slowly moved away from it. I can see Matt nodding. It was a natural shift, and I'm very grateful for it. But what I found is, what works depends on the person, and it depends on whether they're carrot-based or stick-based, whether they have health issues, or whether they're focused on saving the planet, or whether they're focused on spirituality, whether they're scared of Gurma. It depends. So in some examples, what's worked is organizations that actually were already mostly vegan, but they weren't explicitly saying they were, and then an AGM, because of all the popularity, and it's suddenly being in everyone's faces about going vegan and why, they declared it. They said, we've been vegan for the last however many years, but now we're telling you any food we provide will be vegan and Jain. Some other organizations weren't, but then, I did a talk at their place of worship, or someone else did, and there were other things, and then they suddenly announced, yeah, we were always Jain, we're now going to be vegan as well. So amazing. Other organizations have got vegan options. Everything is Jain by, the baseline, and then they provide vegan options. But the other things are, like, just it being discussed calmly, not being preachy, not being attacky, just calmly. If someone asks me, why are you eating that, or why are you not eating that, then I can say, like, if there are other people around, I'll say, yeah, I'm happy to share, but do you want me to tell you now? Because it might not go down very well, and then depending on what other people say, then I'll tell them. So it needs to be, what I found works is it being expressed in a nice, calm way. People talking about what vegan means, why they went vegan, because obviously, based on what I said earlier, they'll have different reasons. Talks explaining how easy it is to be vegan, the reasons behind it, which I've done many. Explaining the processes, not to scare them, but just so they have the facts behind dairy and wool and silk and down. Like, they're things that I never knew, and once I knew them, I made that shift. So, all of those things to help them come face to face with, kindly, the reality of the systems behind all this. Some people will hear that, and they'll be like, yeah, okay, I don't care. I still want to, and that's where they are. And I need to not be angry with them for that. I need to have, again, compassion for them and myself. But just, let everyone be on their journey and do what I can, and keep try and be equanimous while I'm doing it. I think that's, yeah.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. Rabbi Shmuley.
Yeah, what Hina and Matt shared really resonates a lot for me also, and really feeling like I get the angry vegan, and the screaming vegan. I totally get it, and also feel like it really hurts the cause, in a lot of ways. Those who are kind of shaming or screaming, and the like. And for me, it's been about relationship building, community building, having people feel connected to people, offer good food where people can feel like, oh, I can live a great life with good people and with good food, and feel really good. And that people want to be like people they respect. And the more that vegans can become just kind, compassionate in all aspects of their life, people are going to want to be like them. I do still think there's a place for horror documentaries. It was a part for me to like really grasp. And like, there is a place for people to see that, but on their own volition, and at their own timing, as is said. So two things I'm doing right now, two things we're doing, me and Emma and Shemayim and the broader community. One is a debates program. I've offered to debate any rabbi in the world, and the winner gets $5,000 towards the organization, whoever wins, and their congregants get the vote. So most likely they win, but it gives us access to a community who would normally not hear the message. They just take for granted that, obviously, I'm a Jew, everyone around me eats meat, so what's the problem? And they wouldn't hear this alternative message. The others are synagogue vegan challenge, where we are giving grants to synagogues to go vegan and offer this type of education. So in our experience, incentives are real. People need incentives sometimes to try new things. So we're trying to do that. And just the last thing I'll say here is just identity shifts. Identity is so powerful as a way to sustain commitment, and thinking that as part of the educational engagement of how people think of their identity and what that shift can look like for them.
Yes, thank you so much. So with that, we are going to move on to audience questions, and I'm going to ask that those be written in the chat. We've already had a few in, so I'm going to just start with the first one that I see here, which is in church they pray on earth as it is in heaven. How do they think about what that means? We sing all creatures of our God and King, lift up your voice and with us sing. So sort of a question and a statement there, but if anyone has any comment on that, feel free to jump in. Okay.
Well, I'm happy to jump in there. It looks a little Christian-y. At least I recognize some of those hymn lyrics. So
Yeah.
I'll jump in here. I guess whenever I think on earth as it is in heaven, I always try to maintain a fairly rigorous scope distinction. And what I try to do is I think of my little tiny patch of earth, right? Because if little old Matt Halteman has to try to think about earth, right, as it is in heaven, that just is easy to go in one ear and out the other. So what I try to do is think about, okay, well, on my little patch of earth, what does it mean, right, to live here as it is in heaven? And then I try to do the old Socratic thing of getting to know myself, right? What are my talents? What are my gifts? What are the things that I love to do? What are the things that I'm terrible at, right? And then I try to figure out how to channel as much of the talents and gifts and as much of the ignorance, right, away from the things that I'm probably not going to be able to be salt and light for, and toward the things that could really make a difference in my tiny little sphere of influence. And I think thinking about it that way, again, going vegan is such a beautiful way to concentrate, right? The powers that you have over your little patch of ground. And I've found that that can be beautiful when it comes to leaving little holes under the fence so that the squirrels can outrun the hawks. Or, I mean, there's all sorts of ways, right, that you can live this out without being perfect, right, in the way that you do this. So when I think on earth as it is in heaven, what I'm thinking is on my little tiny patch of ground, start there, concentrate your loves, and try to align them as best you can with divine love. That's how I think of it anyway.
Thank you for that perspective. Does anyone else want to comment on that question? If not, I do see a new one here.
I just wanted to say, you know what Matt just said? It reminded me of the duality we have in our minds. So one way that I think that has also actually helped me go vegan and stay vegan is that if we have harmony in our thoughts, our speech, and our behavior, that is heaven on earth. Because I know I don't mean it in any specific religious way, but just, you know, in terms of the experience, because otherwise we're just torn and we're lying to ourselves or lying to other people in some way or another. And if we cut that out and we live in a harmonious way with our speech and our thoughts and our behavior, like, wow, what bliss. Like, you know, I would look in the mirror and I'd feel like, yeah, okay. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, but it's like the rabbi said about the veganism being the flaw. Yeah, and even I think Matt said about not being perfect. Far from it. Vegan doesn't mean it's the end of everything and we're perfect, but we're working on it. It's a work in progress. And then from there we can carry on learning and evolving. And while we remain aligned, or if we strive for being aligned, because even that's hard to attain all the time, regardless of where you are on the journey, I mean, wow, that would be amazing.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to pick up on your great comments, and in the spirit of our Jewish vegan movement being called Shemayim, which in Hebrew means heaven. And the reason Shemayim is called heaven is because the idea is we don't want to just pray to escape this broken world to then live in a perfect world, but rather transform the earth to be like a heaven. That is our work here in this world. And part of it is to move beyond the dualistic or the binary of heaven and earth, and try to make those one. And I think so too here, that the dark and the light, to move beyond that as opposites, but rather that we live in both at once. On the one hand, we live in a broken world where broiler chickens are kept in the dark, in dark sheds, for their whole lives, where sometimes 30,000 are stuffed in there. Cows are born in and put into these crates. The bird killing line, there's like a 90 to 120 birds a minute, 7,200 an hour on these, and the reality, if you really look at it, is so dark and scary, not just in the animal suffering world, but in the climate realm. And yet at the same time of all that darkness, there's so much light, there's so much goodness, there's so much love in the world. And I'm very skeptical of anyone who's only selling darkness, and also skeptical of people only selling light. I think that that in this movement, I want to be a part of trying to figure out how to hold the heaven and the earth.
Thank you. So our next question is, when you read the Genesis narrative, there is no violence. Are you aware of any scholars who talk about the non-violence of the Genesis creation compared to any other creation texts? So if anyone has a comment about that. Any other questions anyone has, you are welcome to put that in the chat.
I could say a word or two about that from a Christian perspective.
Please do.
I believe Michael Gilmore's Eden's Other Residents handles those issues. And then there's another book, and I can't come up with it on the spot, but I'm going to make a list of all the books that I've either mentioned or thought about mentioning and failed to remember because I'm getting old. And I will send that to you, Emma, and then you can circulate that. But there are some interesting books that have been written in a comparative mode on the nonviolence in that Genesis narrative. And my suspicion is that probably both panelists know more about. I am not a theologian, so most of this is stuff I'm learning right as I go. I'm a philosopher, but there are a couple books I can recommend with what I send around.
Just the one little thing I might add is, the Greeks thought the world was eternal, and this is one of the only areas where Maimonides disagrees with Aristotle, although he absorbed so much Aristotle, in saying the world was created, and creation was crucial to his ethical worldview. But I think part of what is important about creation is the sense that everything that was created was to some degree an end in itself, as opposed to just instrumental. And the world existed without humans, without that final day. And the animal kingdom existed, and the world was good even before humans were there. And I think that that's that state of peace to return to, that state of dignity to all beings, feels like a crucial part of this anti-violence ideology.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Looking for any other last minute questions here that anyone might have before we wrap up. I've also put some helpful links there in the chat. And I do want to ask that if you have the capacity to make a donation to Peace Advocacy Network, so that we can continue to put on these panels and bring us all together and have these amazing discussions that I don't really know of where they're happening anywhere else live like this. So yeah, thank you so much everyone for being here. We really appreciate your time, the panelists, and also Lisa and Barbara for co-sponsoring this. And with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. And we will see you at our next panel, which is November 18th. And I will make sure to email our participants here with anything else we mentioned that you might want to refer to. So thank you so much.